Hi, this is Amanda Dolan, and welcome to the Mental Society. Today, we are joined by Dr. Neil Berliner. Dr. Berliner is an American comedy writer, stand-up comedian, comedy producer, and instructor. He began his professional career with The Howard Stern Show, writing for several roasts, and the rap lyrics for the frequent show guest, Fruity Nutcake Rappin' Granny, an elderly hip-hop artist. Neil then continued on to Comedy Central and the New York Friars Club, where he wrote the roast of William Shatner, Flavor Flav, Pat Cooper, and Matt Lauer. In 2013, Neil was invited to write for Mad Magazine, which is America's top humor publication. His comedy material has also appeared in the New York Times, The View, on VH1, the New York Daily News, the New York Post, Page 6, The Village Voice, and a lot more, as if that wasn't enough. He is one of the most requested joke writing instructors in the United States. He has presented his Anatomy of a One-Liner seminar at the World Series of Comedy and the People's Improv Theater, instructed thousands of comedians at every level. Neil has performed stand-up comedy in many clubs and theaters throughout New York and Florida. And in 2022, you were named the Comedy Writer in Residence for the Comedy Cures Foundation. And that charity organization has done events for patients and caregivers on 4 continents over the last 20 years and is supported by Jerry Seinfeld's Foundation and many other top names in comedy. And if that wasn't enough, you are also a doctor you're the medical director of a large mental health agency in Brooklyn. That is a whole lot of comedy and fun that you have experienced in your life.
I'm exhausted just hearing that, tell you the truth.
It sounds like a lot. I mean, it is a lot.
Wow.
That's sometimes when you hear it all.
Time over the years to get that list going.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, isn't that, well, it started in 99, right? With Howard Stern. Is that where your comedian?
Yeah, that's when I got my start in comedy. I was lucky enough to get a call from the Howard Stern Show after I had written for this character, an elderly woman named Fruity Nutcake Rappin' Granny. And
if you're listening and you haven't checked her out, you must. She is hilarious. Like, yes, check her out.
Yeah, she's all over YouTube and all those places. And so we were lucky that she got to do 10 or 15 appearances on the Stern Show. And I did a little stuff for the Stern Show. I wrote for some roasts for that show and got friendly with comedian Artie Lang, who helped me a lot. And one thing led to another, you know. It was like a lattice where you go from thing to thing, you know. Started with the Stern Show, then on to Comedy Central roast, and then Friars Club, Mad Magazine, and teaching comedy. And so, you know, it's been fun.
So the very few comedians that I know personally have talked to me a lot about like how hard it is just to get started, because it feels like for every 100 times you audition or go to a open mic night, there's only 1 time or 2 times that feels successful or gets you somewhere. How true is that, you think, that success is hard to come by?
It's a very difficult business to be in. The success rate is very low to become, famous.
Mm-hmm.
But things have changed a lot with social media. And I think if young comedians prepare themselves, if they're well versed at social media like TikTok and YouTube and all those things, it gives you a much better chance to become successful. So you can have a lot of good material, but if you don't know how to navigate social media,
right,
no one's going to know about it. So it's really a big part of every comedian's day these days. Every working comedian spends a good amount of time on the computer doing their social media, aside from writing material and performing material and traveling. So that's what the job come for the vast majority of comedians.
Well, and I know that Steve Hofstetter is a comedian that I have enjoyed for a while. And I know that during the pandemic, he created essentially a virtual comedy club for comedians so that they could continue to work. and be in front of live Zoom audiences. But I think, also he talked about it being good for him because it gave him something to have a purpose to do.
Well, I know Steve from New York, actually. I've met him, and good guy and funny. And yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point that during the pandemic, everybody was isolated. I mean, all entertainment stopped essentially, and we had to look for new ways to communicate, get out there with the public. And Zoom and other similar apps were a big part of that. And now it's become a part, a permanent part of entertainment.
Yes. I mean, and it's, in fact, like, to go back to Steve Hofstetter, he created a weekly comedy show with a comedian in Australia. And I went to that for a long while until my schedule changed. But there's a Facebook community around that show, and people have become friends through comedy, like through connecting. And I think that comedy, just like other forms of art,
Sure,
you connect with people that have similar likes. Like there are certain comedians that are not my cup of tea. And then there's others. And I think that when you find those others, the ones that you connect with, you kind of find your people because you find the same thing funny.
Oh yeah, there's a tremendous range of comedians out there, and there's somebody for everybody, but you'd be surprised, there's a lot of cross-pollination too. People you wouldn't think would come to your shows might come to your show, and comedians you might not think are your cup of tea if you listen to them. Basically funny is funny. So
it is.
Sometimes giving a different kind of comedian a chance is a good thing. It's like any variety, like you like music, you have the bands that you like.
And talk about music. I was with someone and I just put my entire library on shuffle. And I went from Fish to Brandy Carlisle to Tesla, and then there was a Beethoven's concerto. Those were, I was like, okay, I have a well-rounded music taste. And so go back to a little to comedy and kind of how you work. You help comedians write jokes and maybe even find themselves as who they are as a comedian. But
yeah, a good way of putting it, because it's really at least two-prong kind of process that I do and a lot of other comedy instructors do. We deal with material and we also deal with persona. So comedians sometimes, especially younger comedians, have this issue of finding their persona and the way they're going to deliver things and present their material. And then there's the material end of it. And it takes both, it takes both.
Right.
I mean, the best stand-up comedians are actors, basically. If you think of everyone who's gotten a sitcom, they're among the best actors. They weren't chosen randomly. They were chosen with some potential to act, and stand-up comedy is a big part of it is acting. It's timing and facial expression, body movement, etc.
And I think it's also a quick-wittedness and an ability to pivot in the face of hecklers.
Oh yeah, crowd work and hecklers have to be dealt with. It's something that's part of the game.
And with a heckler at a live comedy show, you can ignore them or you can call them out. And often when you call them out, you're doing that in front of a whole bunch of people that they don't want the heckler saying anything either because they're enjoying the show. You talked about social media. So when people heckle on social media, it maybe looks a little different, but it can be really anonymous. And there's not that interplay that crowd work would have. So how can that impact a comedian's growth if they feel, I don't know, that the people that they're trying to reach don't like what they're putting out there?
Well, if enough people don't like what you're putting out there, then you shouldn't be a comedian. You come to that realization after a while, But If it's just a heckler here and there, then as you say, the audience is on the side of the comedian, not the heckler, essentially.
So,
And whether it's Zoom or live or whatever it is, as you said, people want to hear the show. So there's an immediate alignment of the audience with the performer versus the heckler.
so like working in psychology and as a psychiatrist, and in my own experience, community has been a really important part of my healing process. So when you think about like your patients, even like with comedians that have a following and a group of people, how important is that community just for our own mental health and healing?
Which community are you talking about?
Any community, like just to be part of a community, how important do you feel?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, community is the opposite of isolation. So just to be a part of something is very important for people, And again, it became exaggerated when COVID hit because the isolation part outweighed the community part. If you think about any community you were in, whether work or, parents groups or, people you play tennis with or whatever it is, or comedy, and, comedians are a community too. So
Right.
we lost our community basically. So what Steve did was a very good thing. Other comedians have done similar things, online. So yeah, to emphasize community is very important, especially these days. Absolutely.
So I'm gonna sneak in. When I was doing research on you, I read about the schmuck chair. And
right.
do you share, like, take a minute to talk about what the schmuck chair is?
Yeah, well, the schmuck chair is okay. It's a chair, and it usually refers to. It started when my wife would take me shopping to clothing stores, women's clothing stores, usually on a Sunday when I want to watch a game of some kind on TV, and I would have to hold her pocketbook outside the dressing room of the women's clothing store and hold all the clothes that she was thinking about buying, and goes on for half an hour, 45 minutes, and you're sitting there, with a forlorn look on your face. So we started taking pictures of me in these different chairs in different stores. And my friend Elaine Boozler, do you know her? Famous comedian,
Yes.
Boozler. We went to same high school actually in Brooklyn, and she started talking about the schmuck chair in her act sometimes. And Elaine always gives credit to the comedian that she, uses, if she uses the material. And I started getting phone calls from people who knew me saying, Elaine Boozler said something about you in a chair or something, some kind of schmuck chair or something. So gotta give a shout out to Elaine for always giving credit.
Well, I read that last week, and then this weekend, I've always thought, like my ex-husband would sit with me, or, even my kids sometimes would be stuck sitting in that chair outside the dressing room. And I never really thought much about it because it was always me on the other side. But this weekend, I went with my partner and his two sons to a comic book and sports card store. And I sat on the, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a schmuck, but the schmuck stool in the corner. It wasn't even a comfy chair. It was like a bar stool from,
right.
And I was like, oh, this must be what it feels like to sit here for an hour while they look at all of these things that I'm not interested in at all.
Exactly. So that's what it comes down to. Being stuck somewhere you don't want to be with another person doing something they want to do.
And it's with someone that you care about, typically.
Right. So, some husbands don't go shopping with their wives at all. And some, I guess, wives don't go shopping with their husbands for stuff. But, I'd rather be with my wife, and I don't mind sitting in the chair for a while,
And I think, it can go back to that connection and community as well. Like even, I mean, whether it's with your wife that you're just present with her during that time, or maybe like there's a couple other husbands at the other chairs and you all just get to be miserable. I don't know if that's the right word together.
Well, I'll tell you, Amanda, there's usually one chair only. So it's the other husbands are stuck being even more pissed off because they got to stand and hold the stuff while the other guy is sitting. So I guess I'm less miserable if I get the chair than if I have to stand.
And, well, And that maybe we can go back to our kindergarten days of sharing and, taking turns in the chair.
Right.
So
And it reminds me of in a way of musical chairs, right? If you're
yeah,
if you're the schmuck who's stuck, who doesn't get a chair, then you're unhappy, I guess. More unhappy than the guy sitting.
yes. But I think, I don't, there's also something about that being stuck in a place that doesn't always feel great. Like no one wants to be stuck on the chair waiting for someone. And I think sometimes we get stuck when we're trying to grow as a person, whether that's heal our mental health or grow in our career. And so working with comedians as they are developing their career, how does their mental health and mental well-being impact their personal and professional growth?
Well, it's possibly a chicken or egg argument for some people, because some people in comedy are in comedy in the first place because they're trying to work out their issues.
Mhm.
I mean, comedians look at things differently. And, a lot of people who are depressed look at things differently, through a certain perspective. So, there's a balance there. And comedy and the performing arts in general are not direct or straight career paths. You don't know what's going to happen when you decide that performing arts is going to be your career goal. So, for instance, I became a doctor. I knew when I went to med school that if I didn't flunk out, I would wind up being a doctor. It's like a linear kind of path.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you go into the performing arts, you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, all the famous people we know about didn't know that they were going to be famous. They wanted to be famous.
Yeah.
And for every famous person we know about, there are, 10,000 people who try to do the same thing and are not famous.
And I think sometimes you find that fame far later in life than you expected. Like you just show up at the right place at the right time.
Right. Like a good example that just popped into my mind when you said that was a guy like Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad.
Yes.
I'm not a comedian, but he was an actor all his life, a fantastic actor. Also, Captain Picard from Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm blocking on his name, but Patrick Stewart.
Yes.
I shouldn't block on his name. I met him. He's a great guy. But anyway, he was an actor, and he was a Shakespearean actor. And then all of a sudden he's famous on Star Trek, and his fame, skyrocketed, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So those are two examples of people who they spent their whole lives doing what they wanted to do. So that's the key, I think. If you're going to go into the performing arts, you really can't do it for money, because the money it's very unlikely that you're going to make a lot of money going into the performing arts. It's always been that way. And it's still that way. If you hit it in comedy, though, if you hit it big, then you hit it really big, though.
Yeah.
The top comedians, the Jim Gaffigans and Dave Chappelle's of the world, they're making double-digit $1 million every single year.
Or Jerry Springer, who, had, this amazing show and produced and wrote and all the things, made a lot of money. I know that, he has a foundation now, but you don't see him in a lot of shows like I remember when I was growing up. That might also be because I don't have live TV and I watch streaming services that are exactly what I want to watch.
Right.
But it almost seems like you work really, really hard and then there's a huge payoff, or there's not much of one at all.
Right, but you know what? The payoff can be not economic too, because I know a lot of comedians who will never be famous, and they have a great time. They like the life. They like traveling. They like being on cruise ships. They like the friends they make. They just like the lifestyle. So money is only one part of a lifestyle. So
well, and
money and fame are two aspects of a lifestyle in show business.
And I think money and fame are two different things as well.
Right. I'm saying they're just two aspects of a show business life, let's say. So there are plenty of people in show business who have every other aspect of that life. They have the other advantages of show business, just don't happen to be famous or are rich, but they're rich in other ways.
And you can be famous or infamous and not have money, and And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. It
And
doesn't.
you can be famous and not be happy too. And you can be rich and famous and not be happy too. So,
well, and I think that, but to bring kind of back around to mental health, a comedian like Robin Williams, who, he was dealing with maybe a mental illness. I know that there was other illnesses going on as well, but all of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us thought of Robin Williams as this happy, funny man who has everything. Everyone liked him, right? And then he commits suicide. And for many people, myself included, thought, but why? Like, you've got it all, so why?
because your perception of him having it all is not really him having it all.
Right.
That's just your perception of him having it all.
And
it's not the same thing.
Right. Oh, and I think, almost exactly a year ago, a good friend of mine's husband committed suicide. And he was one of those guys that you would, on the surface, never think that he would. Because he was always happy and had a smile on his face. And so I think that can be something that's really insidious with mental illness, is that we don't see it the way that we see cancer or a broken arm.
Right. Well, just as you didn't see it with Robin Williams, you didn't see it with your cousin.
Right. And for myself, I did not attempt suicide. I planned my suicide, but like down to like the minute, almost like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write these letters. I'm going to go to this place. I'm going to make this call. So, and I've talked to people who they were like, I didn't know, like, I had no idea. Like, you had all of your stuff together. At the time I had 2 young kids who were in school. I was married. We had the 3-bedroom house and the 2-car garage and the 3 dogs. And I was the president of the PTA. Like, I had all the things. And yet, under the surface, I just was miserable.
Yeah.
And so I think comedians can do a really good job at covering up the pain with the jokes.
Yes.
Did you say you love that about it, or?
I said no doubt about that.
Oh, no doubt about that. Yeah. And
look, it doesn't apply to everybody, but
well, no.
Comedians are part of the general population, and the general population has a 20% incidence of depression. So there's a 20% incidence lifetime of depression in the general population, worldwide. So 20% of comedians are not immune to that. They're part of that.
And the likelihood that a comedian is impacted by a mental illness, and by that I mean someone that they care about has a mental illness.
And in fact, it's probably more than 20% for comedians thinking about it, because comedians are more introspective. They look at the world. They look at what's wrong with the world. So aside from the things that might depress them about themselves, I think comedians are more prone to be depressed about the world in general, the state of the world. So I think that because they're just looking, we're looking at everything all the time, and we're looking at different ways to present situations, and that brings up negative stuff very often. But
I mean, even if because I feel like a lot of comedians, maybe all comedians, their jokes are based in their own reality, right? Like if you write a joke about your family, it might not be 100% exactly the story that happened in your family, but there's a lot of truth.
Well, I would beg to differ with you there, because, the writers I know and myself, we can write for situations that aren't our own situations. So that's part of the ability to write comedy, I think, to be able to put yourself into a situation that's not your own reality, and you can imagine that reality.
Right.
That's how you can write funny stuff about it. Like, I'm doing a project now, doesn't matter what project, but I have to put myself in a different perspective, a perspective of a different person than me, and I can do that. So I think most people who write comedy can do that, so it's not, a lot of comedy is self-examination, like you suggested, but it doesn't have to. I don't think it really has to be.
But like you said, when you do that, try to put yourself in someone else's place or in a different situation than is your normal, that's when that like maybe not so great view of the world can pop up because you're
Yeah,
looking
but
at all the ick.
but the character also could be a very optimistic character too, and just see things, in an optimistic way. So I think to be a decent comedy writer, you have to be able to put yourself into different personas and write as if you're that person, that character.
Yeah. And I interviewed someone recently who he wears costumes. He's a cosplayer, and wearing a costume and being someone else was part of his healing journey. So is that the same with comedy writers, that like kind of being someone else, whether it's on a show or writing, is that kind of a fake it till you make it sort of?
Well, I think that's very true of acting in general. Acting is, pretending you're somebody else. Essentially, that's what it is. It's all pretend.
And his life all pretend. So, we could get into that, but that's it. Yeah, that makes sense that there's a pretending to be someone else so you can escape your situation.
Well, it's pretending to be someone else for the job. So it's very, people have different motivations for the job. There are, like we said, there are some people who are dealing with their own issues and want to be somebody else for a particular reason. But then there are people who just want to be actors or actresses, and for whatever reasons, they're willing to do it, and they learn to do it, and that's that. So I think there are different motivations for different people. It really depends. But acting is being somebody you're not. That's what it is.
Yeah.
When you're an actor, you're not playing yourself. You're playing somebody else. So that's what acting, when you come right down to it, that's what it is. For whatever the motivations are.
And I enjoy when I get to just pretend a little bit to be someone else. Like for me, when I get spam calls, specifically like the ones, whatever, I will drag those people on and just act like
I'm goof on them. Yeah, you'll goof on them and have fun.
Because sometimes my job is stressful, and I have 2 teenagers, and I love them, but I have 2 teenagers, and they can be exhausting. And so sometimes it's fun to just act like an idiot and mess with someone just because.
Everybody likes escapism sometimes.
Yes.
It's stressful. Life is stressful. To be yourself all the time, I guess, is stressful sometimes. So it's fun to, come out of that persona.
And just, to be on all the time, as I think that a lot of us are now with social media. We put so much of ourselves out into the world and maybe, I think a lot of social media is people playing a role, right? Like, there's your social media persona and then who you really are.
Oh, of course.
And I will say this over and over again. Oftentimes social media is like you are comparing your life to someone else's highlight reel. Like when you look at someone's social media, they're only posting the good stuff.
Yeah. No one's the worst persona on social media.
And then I know that for myself, when if I am seeing someone complain and it's over and over and over again, like, this is terrible, I don't want to hear that. Like, I really do want the highlights because that brings me some joy. I'm also have begun to very well curate my social media and unfollowing things that don't serve me well. And that's a way that I've protected my mental health. Before we go, I'm curious about this comedy writer in residence with the Comedy Cures Foundation. Can you share a little bit more about what that?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
To do for that?
Yeah. So I know a woman who's a comedian. Her name is Saren Rothberg, and she's a stage 4 cancer survivor from about 20 years ago. She had cancer, and she was a comedian, and she decided that she wanted to make the lives of patients and caregivers happier. And she started a big, well, it wasn't big when she started, but she started a foundation called Comedy Cures, and it brings events, comedy events, to caregivers and patients all over the world. I think on 4 or 5 continents for the past 20 years, hundreds of events. And a lot of the big comedians support it. You mentioned the Jerry Seinfeld Family Foundation, and Dave Attell and Chris Robinson, just Keith Robinson, and I think Wanda Sykes, and many famous comedians have supported Comedy Cures. And I am their comedy writer in residence. So I do various projects for them. Like we have every day, we put up a weird holiday jokes. I write most of those, and we do a writer's room. I started a writer's room of very high-end, talented comedy writers from all over the country, and we pick a topic every month to write jokes about, and we brainstorm it as if we're in the writer's room of like a late night talk show, and then we get those jokes out to the public. So that's been gratifying, trying to give something back.
Yeah, and then,
I'm sorry.
No, finish what you were.
No, they do research studies, and yeah, Sharon's very devoted to this, and it's grown to a very big organization, actually.
I was going to say, as the daughter of someone who had cancer, and my father died 24 years ago. But entertainment and ways to escape, like whether it was comedy or, there was a player piano in the cancer wing of the hospital that my dad was in a lot. And it was so much fun to go in this room with a player piano. And so I appreciate that like you are part of a group that provides that escape from, quite frankly, the fear of the reality of cancer. Because there is a lot of unknown there, and humor.
Well, I thought it was a good way to combine my medical training and my comedy background. It's like a perfect marriage, perfect mix.
So do you use comedy with your patients too, or does it just depend on the patient and how they?
Yeah, it depends on the situation, depends on the how high functioning the patient is. Humor can be used in medicine to get across an idea that you want the patient to understand, let's say, or agree with. It's communication. It's part of communication. Basically, doctors are trying to sell to a patient their idea. You have an idea about what you think is good for a patient, let's say. So you have to pitch that idea to the patient. The days are gone where a doctor would say, all right, you're taking this medicine, get out of here. Here's the medicine, goodbye.
Right.
And it really never should have been that way, actually. So now we have patients who are very educated, and they're involved in their healthcare. It's a two-way street. So the physician has to, and anybody in healthcare has to convince the person on the other side of the desk or table to do something, like either, agree with a medication you want to prescribe, or take a suggestion in psychotherapy, or get the operation or don't get the operation, whatever it is,
Right.
I think utilizing humor, it's basically like a sales technique. And I think it's good in any kind of interaction when you're trying to convince anybody of anything, to utilize
humor. Lighten the mood. And I think it lightens the mood. It
lightens the mood. It makes people more amenable to, it makes a connection that makes people more amenable to suggestion, I think.
And laughter, does that impact our mood, like the levels of hormones that
definitely. Well, neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, feel good chemicals, basically,
right?
Increase for whatever reason, increase when people laugh. So
if you're making a difficult decision in a doctor's office and you're getting the opportunity to have a little less stress, right? Like those more dopamine, feel better, and you might be more open to hearing that suggestion.
Yeah. Even yesterday, I was in an office with my wife, a gastroenterologist's office, and this guy had fantastic reviews. And when we met with him, he was funny. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but he had some humorous things in his
Mhm.
dialogue. And it just made me more, it made me like the guy more and want to agree with what he was going to do. And just perfect example of what I just said. It just happened to me yesterday.
Well, and I think too, no offense to you as a doctor, but a lot of doctors have terrible bedside manner, and you don't feel connected to your doctor. So it makes you not believe them, not want to listen to them,
Right.
feel you're not heard. And so sounds like humor can, like you said, create that connection and that relationship. So whether it's for mental health treatment or, something going on with your stomach,
Right.
you're
Whatever
more
it is.
likely to follow through.
Right. Well, terrible bedside manner is essentially saying poor communication. The guy doesn't, or the woman doesn't level with me, or not, is not open to my ideas.
Right.
A dictator, let's say, somebody who just dictates what you should
Mhm.
do, is they're the doctor and you're the patient, something like that. That's really what bad bedside manner is. So, yes, utilizing humor opens up the communication. It makes the person more of a human being, I think, and makes you more amenable to suggestion from that person.
And then it leads to collaboration instead of that.
Right. It makes it a dialogue rather than a monologue. Exactly.
And
It makes it a two-way street.
and as a patient and then as a doctor, if that patient is more likely to follow through on their care because they have that dialogue and they understand the why, or if it's a lifestyle change, hey doc, that's not going to work for me, but let's explore other ways. Patients are likely to be more compliant with
Right.
their care.
We don't call it compliance anymore, by the way. We
Oh,
call it adherence.
adherence. Sorry. Okay.
But you know
Adherence.
what? But it's very, very important to stress that suggestions from doctors are not taken by most patients in general. Like I once saw a study where I would talk about this in some talks I used to do for pharmaceutical companies. When a doctor writes a prescription, only about 1/3 of the prescriptions really go toward complete adherence. Okay, because people don't fill the prescription, or they fill it, or they take the medicine wrong, or they fill it and they don't take it for whatever reason, or they don't take it long enough. So there's lots of barriers to 100% adherence with prescriptions. Okay, but if you communicate better, then the
Right.
adherence goes all the way up. It goes all the way up. Like yesterday, like the doctor's office we were in, it was a very well-run office. So at the end of the visit, we would give in like papers, like you got to get this lab study, or you got to take this medicine, and here's what you got to do. Very concise instructions. And they brought us into a room with nobody else. It wasn't like out in the waiting. It wasn't like out in the lobby where
Right.
So the way you give instructions or give suggestions to patients is very important. The manner in which you do it. So it's all plays into adherence.
And so for me as an individual living with bipolar, I have come to the conclusion that I will take medication for the rest of my life. On some level, unless there's a miracle cure for bipolar all of a sudden, which that would be amazing. And I get made fun of because I'm like the old lady with the little pill container, sits by my bed to make sure that I know I've taken my medicine. And I know I'm better for that. So it's not like, to wrap things up, it just sounds like comedy makes life better.
I think it does.
And it builds.
A lot of people do because it's so popular. It's so popular. You turn on Netflix and at least a third of what you see is comedy, right?
Yeah, and then a third is true crime, which is where I land. I find true crime relaxing. Other people find comedy relaxing. I don't know. So then I would encourage people to go out and find something that makes you laugh, release some of that dopamine and serotonin, and find a community, because community is good for our mental health. Is there anything else you want to add before we end today?
The only thing I would like to add is that I have a new book out actually, and it's
Oh,
called Ha Ha History. It's on Amazon, and it hit #1 actually for new joke books on Amazon in January. And just very briefly, it's a book that goes from January 1st to December 31st, and we do a joke. I co-wrote it with 3 friends of mine. We do a joke for every day of the year from history, from the beginning of recorded time. So
oh, that sounds fantastic. I will make sure that I link that in the show notes
oh, thanks.
so that
Yeah,
people can get to it on Amazon, but it's Ha Ha History.
yeah, 3 separate words. Ha Ha History.
I love that. Awesome. Well, Neil, thank you so much for being here with
Well,
me.
thanks, man. It was a
I
very
appreciate,
interesting conversation.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time. And
Awesome.
I
Thanks a lot.
will link that book below. And also you can find out more about Neil and his comedy at neilberlinercomedy.com, which also will be linked below. And again, thank you for joining me. And thank you for listening and learning more about mental health and how mental health and society meet. Now go out and open up a conversation, find someone that likes the same comedy you do, and discover how mental health is experienced in your world. You can find more episodes of the Mental Society in all the places you find your favorite podcast. And don't forget to subscribe. And also you can find additional resources and articles by visiting our website, thementalsociety.com. And remember that you are not alone, that hope and help are all around you. And until next time, this is Amanda Dolan wishing you good health, mental and otherwise.